Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back from the break to our digital marketing stage at GoTech. These last two sessions feature amazing international thought leaders, so get ready to be inspired. Our next session has a very punchy title, Why Visual Content Marketing is All That Matters in 2021 and Beyond. And our speaker is Amy Balliett, founder and CEO of the creative content agency Killer Visual Strategies. Amy owned her first company, a candy store and ice cream parlor, at the very early age of 17, and she subsequently built a successful career in SEO and marketing and has grown Killer Visual Strategies to become the industry leader in visual communication, working with global brands such as Microsoft, Boeing, Adobe, Starbucks, the United Nations, and more. She is considered a global expert in her field, and she speaks at dozens of conferences each year, including the famous South by Southwest. She is also a regular teacher at the School of Visual Concepts, a LinkedIn Learning instructor, and the author of the newly released book, Killer Visual Strategies. Please remember to put your questions on the question tab on the right. Amy, it's an honor. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody's having a really great GoTech world so far. I'm really thankful to be a part of it. So thank you guys for having me and attending today. A little bit about me. You already heard some great background about me. I would love to give you some background on Killer Visual Strategies, the company, because that will help you understand where this information is coming from. The fact of the matter is that Killer Visual Strategies, we do a wide range of projects, whether it be infographics, ebooks, motion graphics, annual reports, the list goes on. But I like to point that out because we used to be known as Killer Infographics, and that's really where we got our start. And infographics in their purest form are great visual communication. So we really learned quite a lot over the past decade by producing this type of content for some of the world's biggest brands. So everything I want to teach you today are the best practices that we deploy constantly for brands like the ones in front of you. These are the lessons that we have learned so that you don't have to learn them yourself. I'll tell you about mistakes I've made. I will tell you about rules that we've created. And ultimately, I'll really dive into why visual communication is so essential and how that translates into visual content marketing, which for 2021 and beyond is the end all be all of marketing and connecting with your end audience. So let me explain why I'm even saying something like that, why visual content marketing really matters. And to do that, I have to explain why visual communication matters first. So let's start by laying a foundation. The definition of visual communication is to graphically represent information to efficiently and effectively create meaning. Now, the final sentence here in this definition is the most important. It says, when necessary, limited text is used to explicate that meaning. In other words, very good visual communication, well-deployed visual communication, tells stories and shares information through the graphics, not the text. Instead, you should have as little text as possible. Now, the way to think about this from just an everyday perspective is think about a billboard. Think about how a billboard has to capture your attention as cars are just driving by it, whether that be on a highway or on a city street. A billboard can only use about 6 words because a driver's only going to get about 6 words. So that means a billboard needs to visually represent as much information as possible. So in some of the purest forms, billboards are kind of the start of visual communication as a marketing tool. Now, audiences today demand visual content, and they demand visual content rooted in visual communication, utilizing as little text as possible. There are many reasons for this, but the first thing I want to make very clear to you is that 91% of global audiences prefer visual content as their primary, secondary, and tertiary form of information delivery. So in other words, as brands are trying to connect with their customers, whether those customers be loyal customers who have been around forever, or new customers that you're trying to attract, you need to lead with visual content to get their attention rather than leading with catchy text. Now, the companies that do this, the companies that really engage in connecting with their audiences through visual content, they actually see their revenue grow 49% faster than the companies that are still using old forms of content marketing. And when we think about traditional content marketing is often very text heavy. It's about getting great thought leadership articles out there. It's about getting good blog posts and making sure you're writing really well thought out white papers and things like that. But today, content marketing adds in infographics, social media imagery, ebooks, motion graphics, and so on. And what we've found is the visuals in that content marketing are what succeed far more. So if you think about the old phrase, content is king, that's very, very true. But today, visual content is truly king. It's the king that really matters. Now, because visual content is so important, you also have to consider the quality of that content. So when I say visual content is king, quality visual content reigns supreme. And that's because 94% of first impressions today are based entirely on the design of the content that you're putting out in front of your audience. So you have to create great high quality visual content to truly succeed today. Now, let me explain some drivers of this growth. First, let's talk about your audience. The fact of the matter is today's audiences are not taking the time to read. They'll only read about 20% of the text put in front of them when that text is 600 words or more. Now, it's because of this that if you have to put out anything that is text heavy, whether that be your website, an article, what have you, make sure that you are separating every 100 words or so with imagery. If you're doing that, it won't feel overwhelming for your viewer. You'll have a far higher likelihood that your viewer will actually read the information in front of them. So separate your content every 100 to 150 words with a visual that represents that content. That will really help break up that text and ensure that your audience is actually taking it in. Now, one of the reasons today's audiences aren't reading is because it's actually not natural for us to read. This is a learned behavior. We learned it over hundreds of years. It's something that first those in the upper class knew, and a lower class caste system actually did not know how to read. And as a result, an upper class caste system had to use iconography to connect with a lower class system. And I'm talking about ancient times here. As we've evolved over time, yes, more and more people obviously know how to read now, but it is not something that is natural in us. Our brain wasn't actually hardwired to connect via written text. Instead, our brain is hardwired to consume information visually. In fact, we take in visual information 60,000 times faster than any other form of communication that exists. Now, to put that in perspective, let's look at a typical hour. In a single hour, the human brain can take in 36,000 visual messages. In that exact same hour, the brain can read roughly about 15,000 words. And that's for a good reader. That's somebody who has high reading comprehension skills. So they have to take those 15,000 words and string them together to create sentences. Then they have to string those sentences together to create meaning. All in all, in that given hour, it's going to add up to maybe 300 messages that you're going to take in that hour if you're trying hard and really digging into a book. Whereas again, if you're watching a movie or just taking in visual content in that hour, you're actually going to take in an average of 36,000 visual messages. And if you want to really connect with your audience in a way that really represents your brand and ensures that they're getting as much information as possible, lead with video. It's actually the most powerful form of visual communication that exists today. And when I say lead with video, don't make it text heavy video, because if it's text heavy, it's not really visual communication. A great video should be 100% original illustration if it's animated, or original live action. Don't use stock imagery for videos. They don't succeed nearly as well. Now, when we're talking about our brains and that brain science behind our love of visual communication, it's important to consider the fact that this is exactly what our brain was packaged for. When you think about all 5 senses, our brain is primarily focused on the sense of sight and visual processing. 30% of our cerebral cortex is made up of neurons firing just to process that visual information all around us. The second largest bit of processing we do is touch. And so clearly we have a large favorability for visual content. We really love taking that in. And in a world where we're inundated with information from all around us, it makes sense that we would revert to our base instincts to really love visual content and look towards that to take in our information rather than heavy text content. Now, when you're combining small form visuals like universal iconography, let's say, and you combine that with very short text, you actually increase comprehension by an average of 89%. So not only does visual content help you engage your end audience, but it actually helps them understand your product or service far better than if you were just to explain it audibly or via text. So clearly, this is yet another reason why we have this drive for visual content right now. There's this brain science behind it that's really calling out all of us to just crave this type of content. And as a result, we've actually kind of raised the bar for what we view as quality. Today, quality content is really about making sure that you're hitting that first impression, that the design level of the content feels very professional and that it feels very original and bespoke. That's incredibly important. It has to feel custom for the end audience. Now, before I dive deeper, let me give you an explanation for why this is. The answer is simply put, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, the list goes on. We all have at our fingertips the power to create great content. And with that power, we have all of these editing tools that level up that content, that make it look highly professional. So there are people out there who are complete novices at content creation, but because of these social networks and the powerful tools within something as simple as our smartphones, we are now all content creators. And as a result, we expect the brands that want our attention and that want our business to be able to create content better than what we can create ourselves. This is why first impressions are so ingrained in design, because we want brands to level things up. That means that we have to make sure that we're considering form and function. This design, for instance, might have been a great design on its own, but the minute it was placed in its actual location, it's a completely ruined design. So the form of it is great, but it doesn't meet the functionality of its need. This is another example where somebody really wanted to focus on typography to engage an end audience, but that typography is not functioning properly. It says donate to help end children because of the way it's written. So clearly it's a mistake in really making sure that you are using form and function equally. This is another great example of form and function highly missed. The fact of the matter is fonts really do play a role in visual communication. The font you choose sends a message to your end audience. The font that I see in front of me, the bloody one right here at the bumper that says funclownforkids.com, that scares me completely. That is a font that tells me I don't want to hire that clown because he might be a pretty scary person. So when you're thinking about visual communication, you have to consider both form and function. So the form, the look and feel of it, whether it's a high quality design, function, where it's going to live, to ensure that you're designing it for the specifications of where that design will end up. But you also have to consider things like your font choices, because fonts carry forward meaning and elicit an emotional response. So as you're thinking about quality design, here are some examples of high quality visual communication. Very little text, custom illustration, designed perfectly for its location. Here's another example where we're focused on something that is designed for its location using as little text as possible, making the product the hero. And in the world of data viz, this still matters. As you're visualizing data, it's very important that you consider how colors play a role. So for instance, with something like this example in front of you, the purple bars are all related to the exact same consumer group. The yellow bars are a different consumer group, and the green bars are a different consumer group. So it gives you an example of just how we can use colors to help create patterns for the end audience. And of course, consider your illustration style as well. This is a comic illustration style that you see in front of us, and that's because it's focused on a topic about a well-known comic. And so consider that illustration style and how that speaks to your topic and your end audience. This is what quality is. Superior form plus superior function equals quality design. Now, beyond just simply some of the things I called out, really high quality design shows an investment of time, attention to detail, a clean layout and hierarchy, expert use of typography, accurate data visualizations, and custom illustration. Now, let me share a couple of rules with you that you can test all of your content against to make sure that you're creating successful visual content. The first rule, it's one of my favorites, always think about context. It's a con when there's too much text. Look at this example in front of you. If all of that text went away, would you truly have an understanding of the content that you're about to look at? And even with all of this text here, does it feel overwhelming or cluttered? This is the problem when you use too much text. It can turn your audience off. It's no longer visual communication. Instead, it's an article that is kind of broken up like a design. But in the end, it's still an article with far more than 600 words. Now, here are 3 examples right in front of you of extremely text-heavy infographics. It only takes 1/10 of a second to form that first impression. In 1/10 of a second, if you looked at any one of these, would you want to give them more of your time and attention? The answer is most likely no. This is the problem when you put too much text onto a design. Focus on the rule of context. It's a con when there's too much text. A way you can test this is by putting your text on a different layer in your design, or having your designer do that, and then turning that layer off and looking at your design to see if it makes sense to you. If it makes sense, if you can come away with a few key conclusions, and if you can understand the topic, at that point, you will know that you've created great visual communication. But if you have to read the text to understand what you're looking at, then it's not great visual communication. It's actually the opposite of, and it won't succeed online. The next rule I want to share with you, small visual cues have a large impact. And for this, I really love to tell a quick story. At the end of 2015, Twitter changed one very minor thing in their user experience. They took away a button that was a star and changed it to a heart. Now, this button used to be used as a bookmark tool. People would star a tweet so that they could reference it later. But the problem was the Twitter community wasn't just using it as a bookmark tool. They were actually using it as a way of ending arguments between other folks on Twitter. So they might get into a big debate with somebody and go back and forth in a very negative conversation. And when they felt like they had the last word, they would hit that star button to signal that they were done with the debate and that they had the final say. Twitter wanted to move their audience and their users away from this negativity. So all they did was change that button from a star to a heart. Now, that's a very small change, but because they chose a heart, which symbolizes love, it symbolizes condoning something or approval, it drastically changed how people interacted with the tool. In fact, people were in outrage about it. They were incredibly angry at this shift. Now, you guys can see in these 4 tweet examples just from that time, you can see the hearts in these examples. Those used to be stars. That is a very tiny button that changed, but that very small visual cue drastically changed how people interacted with the tool. And that's the thing about visual communication. Iconography is universal. An icon of a heart has a very universal meaning all around the globe. And so that universal imagery, universal iconography, can make a significant difference in any piece of visual content that you create. It can greatly change how your viewers react to that content. So make sure, as you are utilizing iconography, that you're making the right visual choices, because even the smallest of visual cues can have a very large impact on your end audience. And the third rule that I want to share with you today, there is no gold at the end of that rainbow. Now, here's what I mean. There's this theory that people subscribe to that colors elicit certain emotional responses. Now, at a global conference, I'm sure I don't need to explain to you that that theory is just completely false. The fact of the matter is colors have different meanings all around the globe. We might, in the States, for instance, see something like the color red and imagine stop signs or stoplights. And so we consider it something related to stopping something. Whereas in other countries, red might have a completely different meaning for people. And so colors don't elicit emotional responses. But that doesn't mean that you should use colors just randomly in your visual content. The fact is it's up to you to tell your audience what your colors mean. So I'm going to give you 2 examples here. Now, these are 2 infographics, one on the left, one in the middle. Now, on the right-hand side, we have these 2 infographics just zoomed in on a little bit. Now, I'm not going to go into extensive detail about these 2 infographics, but what I will say is the one on the left is the more successful one. And that surprises quite a lot of people. It surprises people because it looks like a bit of a jumbled mess when you look at it from afar. But when you zoom into it, you actually realize that this is designed for a very specific audience. It's designed for Apple loyalists, for people who really love Apple products. And those people see all of the secret little visual cues in this design that resonate with them. For instance, there's this 556 bytes little sign up here, or 556 items, pardon me, that actually relates to the date of Steve Jobs's birth. So clearly it's related to Apple in a very unique way. The right-hand side is a timeline, but it's usually a scroll bar. In fact, this entire design is wrapped in an old Apple Finder window from the original Apple computer. But what I want to point out here is the color usage. The colors carry forward meaning. At the very top of this design, we have a key that says software, input, output, desktop and tower, all in one, laptop and handheld. That key is associated to the colors. So everything in green is software, everything in yellow is input, output, orange is desktop, tower, red is all in one, purple is laptop, and blue is handheld. So now the colors have a very specific meaning in categorizing information. But there's one other meaning beyond that, and that is the fact that these colors kind of look squiggly, that they kind of look a little jumbled around. That's intentional. The theory is that Steve Jobs, when he came up with Apple, he came up with it on an acid trip. So this is actually meant to be a bit of a tip of the hat to this original theory. It's meant to kind of look like an acid trip. So that's a huge reason why the colors are like that. And then they chose a rainbow color palette because they were pulling colors from the original Apple logo. So there's a lot of intent behind these colors, which help carry forward meaning. But if we look at this rainbow of colors in the center, one thing you'll notice is there's no meaning behind the colors. The red branches don't have any correlation to each other. The blue branches don't, the green branches don't. There is literally no meaning at all behind the choice of the colors. And that's a problem because we look for meaning in colors. So when you deploy colors in your visual content, make sure that you're creating a pattern for the eye. Make sure that you're using your colors intentionally, and also make sure that you're only using a rainbow of colors if there's a meaning behind that rainbow. Don't use a whole bunch of colors for the sake of it. In fact, the more colors you use, the more your end audience is going to look for meaning in those colors. So focus on using your brand colors or just 3 or 4 primary colors within a design so that it doesn't get too overwhelming for the viewer. Now, those are just some tips. The fact of the matter is I could spend hours diving into all of the different types of rules that exist. I just touched on 3. There are 8 rules that really matter in visual communication. You can learn about all of those in my book if you would like, but ultimately I want to make sure I'm saving time for some questions. So I'm going to jump right to Q&A. And while doing that, I have my contact information up on the screen in case you don't get to have your question answered. I'll be able to answer it if you just email me or tweet me at Amy Balliett. And with that, let's jump into any questions that there may be.
Thank you very much, Amy. That's been so insightful and full of visual examples and explanations. It was great. Thank you very much. There's one question regarding if you go a little bit back, so higher, as a higher level, where do brands get stuck when they come to thinking about their visual content and designing it and considering it? What happens that we end up with some of the examples you showed?
So there are a couple of things that happen in that arena. Oftentimes, the marketing team and the design team are 2 different siloed teams, or marketers don't even have designers at their disposal, and they're either tasked with doing the work themselves or hiring a designer. These are very difficult things to do because designers kind of speak their own language and marketers speak their own language. And very rarely do the 2 come together and understand what the other's asking for. That's actually really what propelled me to write my book, because my background's in marketing. And when I started my agency, I did it because as a marketer, I needed an agency that spoke to marketers properly. And so I really wanted to empower marketers to learn how to speak to designers, which is really what the book is about. It teaches you exactly how to get a designer really doing exactly what you need for you and not making these mistakes. But ultimately, that is one of the biggest issues. The other big issue is budgets. Marketing budgets are constantly stripped back. And now we're in a pandemic. And the fact of the matter is the first things to get cut in a pandemic are often marketing and design budgets. But the problem is high quality design requires an investment of time and money. There's absolutely no way you can produce this content overnight or for pennies on the dollar. And so what we see is there's a wide breadth of low quality visual content out there, which lowers the bar for a lot of people. Marketers look at that and say, oh, I only need to design at this level. And so they'll either use a DIY tool or they'll hire a really cheap designer and they'll stay designing at that level. Meanwhile, the content that succeeds is the content that's designed at a much higher level. And so it's about budgets. Marketers deserve far higher budgets so that they can get high quality content. But it is also about just the disconnect. Designers oftentimes don't understand what marketers are asking of them. And so there needs to be the right process in place to really ensure that a designer is producing exactly what that end marketer needs.
Thank you so much. I mean, that makes perfect sense. So it's both of them. That will sum up our session. Thank you once again, Amy. Thank you, everyone. And I'll see you in the next session. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.